Hey everybody, welcome to the Maya lecture. So I want to say a couple things because this is our second lecture on Hinduism slash Vedanta philosophy. The if you those of you who've read the first couple chapters, which you should have read by now, the first chapter talks a lot about the origins of Hinduism and what we call Hinduism and the Vedanta tradition and the kind of beginning of what would later be called the Vedas. The Vedas typically are translated as some kind of secret knowledge or higher level knowledge, a more religious knowledge beyond just knowing how to fix your sink. Something beyond everyday scientific mechanical knowledge. And then chapter three is really gives you the heart and core aspects of Hinduism as we know it today. And the three concepts, the one we already talked about in the last video, the Brahman Atman, you'll see that I'll call back to that a little bit. So it's important to understand that first before we talk about this concept, which is Maya, or the veil of illusion. Those three ideas are so deeply interrelated, as we'll see in all of Hinduism and all of Vedanta tradition, the Vedanta tradition in particular, that understanding those will really lay the groundwork for understanding the rest of everything we'll study in the later chapters. And you'll even see that, for instance, the Upanishads that are talked about in chapter 3, which means to sit at the foot of the master. The Upanishads are often seen as the philosophical depth and analysis. What the Vedas started, the Upanishads continued to develop ideas of the one, of the Brahman and the Atman and so forth. And then the Bhagavad Gita is often seen as the crystallization of all of those previous traditions. And as you know, those of you who've looked at the syllabus, we're going to spend some time just reading the Bhagavad Gita, which takes place on a battlefield of all places. And as somebody that basically this guy, Arjuna, is about to start a war, and he has all these thoughts and he has a conversation with what ends up being one of the central figures in Hinduism. And anyways, we'll talk about that later, but I just wanted you to kind of crystallize that path that even historically you can see how it goes. It goes the Vedas, the secret knowledge tradition that went on for thousands of years, involved lots of gods, the Upanishads, which is more philosophical, though not entirely, and then the Bhagavad Gita, which kind of puts it all together. And so as we move forward, that should be understood, as well as those, again, Atman, Brahman Atman, and Maya. Okay, so that being said, let's talk a little bit about Maya. First of all, the idea of Maya, you'll see that in some ways it seems in opposition to the concept of Brahman or Atman within us. Again, Brahman or Atman is the one universe, the one that we are all a part of, the grand ocean of the universe. And the Atman is that part of Brahman within us, although Brahman is Atman, right? It's that sort of contradiction, but not contradiction from the perspective of Vedanta. And so Maya should not be seen in opposition to that. Maya is simply what happens when, remember, the whole core of this tradition is that it's God experiencing himself or themself or herself. It's God coming to know and be aware of himself. God starting out as one and differentiating into all these different parts. Right? And the problem is that we forget that we're one. Once that differentiation happens, and that's where there seems like there might be a conflict between Maya and Brahman, because Maya is the forms that the really refers to the forms taken as that differentiation occurs, as the little pieces of the amoeba or the pieces of water, excuse me, start to branch out from the central ocean. Right? There's still one part of the ocean, but they forget that they're part of the ocean. And so the Maya is kind of this whole veil of illusion that we're born into. It's not anyone's fault. It's just kind of the nature of how things work. It's this veil of illusion we're born into that prevents us from seeing the true God that is within us. Remember that term, panentheism, the idea that we have this Atman within us that truly is Brahman, that really is this grand, all-powerful force, if you will, that, but it's beyond a force, right? It's just this everything that exists in the universe from the perspective of Vedanta. So another way to say this is there's a word in the in chapter 3, I believe, prakriti, right? Prakriti, which refers to the undifferentiated state. So I'm using this word differentiated, which means, as I said, when the water droplets move away from the central puddle, so to speak, right, away from the ocean, they're still part of the ocean, but they're differentiated. So prakriti refers to the undifferentiated part before that happens, the kind of basic structure and laws of nature before it gets divided into these different differentiations, which would include me and you and the tiger and the lion and the cat and the microphone in front of me and the piece of paper I'm looking at and so forth. Right, so that differentiation process, and as noted in the Bresnan reading in chapter 3 as well, I believe there's a connection here to modern science that's kind of quite interesting. In modern science, scientists talk about the laws of nature, right? The basic fundamental laws of what makes the universe what it is. Most commonly you hear the phrase, very commonly you hear the phrase, we are all stardust, right? Because the scientific story tells us that after the Big Bang, however you want to conceive that, matter kind of differentiated itself. This is starting to sound a little like Hinduism, right? Into different planets and stars, and eventually into creatures like ourselves, and through evolution into single-celled organisms and ants and spiders and tigers and lions and bears and us, right, and human beings and monkeys and so forth. So there's kind of a similar idea in Hinduism of this idea of the undifferentiated state of Brahman or Prakriti. Just like in science, there's the kind of undifferentiated state of matter in atoms and all the different, laws and norms that are way above my pay grade that your physics teacher will tell you about, right? That then we can talk about in physics. We can talk about universal laws of nature that apply everywhere and that are part of matter, like the laws of motion, the Newton's laws of physics and so forth, inertia. But then we can also talk about you and me and the way those laws and norms sort of create, so to speak, different forms. It's similar in Hinduism. There's the undifferentiated state of matter of the universe, and then it becomes differentiated. Okay, so bringing it back to Maya, Maya is what is the effect. Let me put it this way. Maya is the effect of that differentiation, that separation from the original matter on ourselves, on our own consciousness. So ever since we're born, think about the five senses. Ever since we're born, we're sort of being given this movie of reality, right? And this is something else that touches on modern science, because we know that reality is deeper than our senses. We know that, for instance, other animals have senses that go beyond ours, like sonar and bats and stronger eyesight in cats and so forth. We're being shown based on our senses a certain level of reality that is just the nature of who we are. Again, it's nobody's fault, right? Hindus aren't blaming anybody. The Vedanta tradition is not blaming anybody. It's just that we're born into these five senses that tell us this story that make us think certain things about reality in the universe. Right? We see the movie unfold before us. We see the way other human beings behave. We mimic other human beings. We have the people we like and the people we don't like. And we develop our own personality. And every day we wake up in the morning and the movie of our lives plays out in a different way. We go to work or school or whatever we do. We wake up and we take care of the kids. We take care of our family. We engage with our partners and our friends. All of this is part of Maya. The movie that's unfolding from the perspective of Vedanta, from the perspective of a Hindu. The movie that's unfolding is Maya, right? And now again, there's nothing wrong with Maya. And fundamentally Maya, because Brahman is everything, Maya is part of Brahman. That's why it's not bad or wrong. However, it does have the effect of making us identify with the movie instead of with Brahman. And right there is the deep insight of the Vedanta tradition, right? That we, again, sort of like the Garden of Eden, not the same, but sort of like the Garden of Eden in the sense that fundamentally we are this deeper, we have this garden of paradise within us, but we have fallen from it just by the nature of the way the one becomes the many, the way the Brahman separates itself, himself, herself, themself, into forms. And it makes us think we are the movie when really we're Brahman, right? There's the key right there. The movie's unfolding according to our senses, and we identify with the movie. We start thinking, I am this separate form, right? This is the core reality of what I am, is this separation. Rather than the core reality of what I am is the grander self, the grander, as we talked about last time, the Atman, sometimes translated as a universal soul, right? As something that we can all connect with. And so the fundamental problem is that, right? We forget what we really are. So let me just continue with the movie metaphor for a second. I think, well, movie theaters aren't as big anymore, especially since COVID, but I'm sure we've all had the experience of, you don't have to think of a movie. You can think of a show. I recently finished Stranger Things, like I'm sure some of you at least did. When we're watching a show or movie that we really like, one of the greatest experiences of that kind of art is that you can sit there with your friends or your partner or by yourself, however you want to do it, and you can immerse yourself in the movie. Right? You can kind of, you might even identify with some of the characters in the movie or the show. But the difference is that fundamentally in the back of your mind, you know it is a movie or show. You might get connected to it. But then once it ends, once the credits roll, you come back and say, okay, wow, that was so good. That was so great. And you talk to your friends about it. But you know that it's just a movie and that it was made by all these producers and actors and directors. So again, the problem with Maya is that we don't realize our own lives are really a movie, right? According to the Vedanta tradition. It's really just a projection from our senses that makes us, that is Maya. That projection is Maya. And it makes us think it's real, right? It would be like watching a movie and just thinking you're Luke Skywalker, right? To use a Star Wars reference. Just thinking you're Will from Stranger Things. Right? Just thinking you're one of these characters without coming back to reality. Right? So for a Vedanta, the coming back to reality, which we'll talk about later, is moksha, or in Buddhism, which spawned from Hinduism. We'll talk about that later too. In Buddhism as enlightenment, that means that you've realized your true fundamental nature. So another way that you'll see this represented in the Bresnan book, but also in much Hindu tradition and writings, the way that it's translated into English is that it's translated as the if you ever see the uppercase self, right? It'll say the true self or the self, and it's uppercase. That like the first letter of the word is like uppercase S. That refers to the Brahman Atman, right? That refers to the grander universal soul of which we're all a part. If you see the lowercase self, that refers to the self as projected by Maya on the TV screen of your life. All your desires and wishes and loves and your personality traits, whether you're strong or weak or whatever, however you characterize yourself, however other people think of you, right? It's the smaller s. So just to kind of heads up that when you see that distinction, that's what they're referring to. The big S refers to the grander self of the Brahman Atman. Now, something else that helps us understand Maya is the etymology, or kind of the word origin, I guess is a better frame for it, is Maya comes from the word, is related to the word magic. Right? So some linguists who study this stuff, they talk about the influence of Sanskrit and other languages from that time on English. So the idea of magic, think about it, magic, the root there is Maya. Maya is this field of illusion. Magic is this way of presenting illusions, pulling a rabbit out of the hat, you know, the common stereotype. So that helped influence our language. And it's kind of fascinating to think about the way language is influenced in these ways. Like in, you know, a language that's dear to our hearts in this area, Spanish and English are the two most common languages for obvious reasons. Spanish was highly influenced by Arabic because during the Islamic Golden Age, when the Muslim empires conquered that southern part of Spain, Arabic was spoken. And as Spanish was developing as a language, Arabic was a big part of the language. So for instance, ojalá, in Spanish, I hope, you know, ojalá tuviera un coche, I wish I had a car. I wish that, think of that word ojalá and the word Allah, in Arabic, which means God. So that's related to I hope, God wishes. I wish God would bring me this. That root word of Allah is in that word, in that Spanish word. So a lot of the traditions and languages that developed in early human societies had a great influence on other languages as well. Al-Azhar is another example in Spanish. There's many. Anytime you hear that al kind of word, that comes from the development, that comes from Arabic when Spanish was developing early. So anyways, I thought that linguistic connection might help with the understanding of Maya, magic, right? It's a type of magic on the screen that is our lives. So one other metaphor that I think helps that is in the book, let's go back to that concept of prakriti, right? Which is before the differentiation happens, like kind of the basic state of matter that exists before all the different forms come into being, which include us and the microphone and so forth. Sometimes that's described as the difference between the clay and the things you make out of clay. So my mom actually was an amateur potter throughout her life, and she used to have a kiln where we would cook. Those of you who know the idea, you form the clay together and you put it in the oven in the kiln, and it cooks a plate or a bowl or whatever, or a cup, whatever you want to make. And so we can think of the prakriti as the undifferentiated state of the clay, right? The clay before you make something out of it. And then the forms or the maya are when you form that clay into the cup, into the bowl, and so forth, right? And again, I want to keep coming back to the core aspect of what, like if there was anything that we could say is the point of the Vedanta tradition, of the Hindu tradition, it's to realize that you are the clay, right? It's to realize that all these different forms that come into being, you shouldn't identify with those because it's going to keep you more in ignorance, not in ignorance like academic ignorance, not like you don't know something, like you don't know 2 + 2 = 4, but ignorance of your true nature, of the capital S self, of the fact that you really are Brahman, of the Atman within you, right? The panentheism, the panentheistic worldview. Right, so that's really the whole core, and that's again just to go back to what I said at the beginning. That's the whole point of these 3 concepts are the foundational concepts: Brahman, Atman, Maya, of Hinduism, which is why I highlight them as the 2 core videos. Okay, so the last part of this concept of Maya I really want to highlight is that there's this great sense of play and joy and love in Hinduism that in the Vedanta tradition that sometimes is described by this word lila, which literally means play. So the idea is that, consistent with everything I've just said, is that as Brahman is experiencing herself, as Brahman is experiencing themselves, it's Brahman is playing the universe like an instrument. You sometimes hear a phrase, something similar to that, and I think there's a phrase like that in the book, in the Bresnan book. Brahman is playing us like an instrument. But we are Brahman, right? So we're all playing our roles. So there's a great joy in playing the role in the movie, right? There's a great joy in playing the roles that we all have. There's a great joy in fully developing your personality because it's all kind of a game, right? It's all kind of the game of Brahman and God experiencing himself. And so the problem is when we treat the game as the only reality. It's not. So this is again getting back to that idea that it's not a dualism where Brahman good, Maya bad. Maya, it just is the way it is. And so once the quicker we realize that we really are Brahman, right, that we have the Atman within us that is Brahman and that Brahman is everything, the quicker we can kind of have fun with life and have joy out of life. And so that's why in a lot of Hindu traditions and ceremonies, you see a lot of dancing and a lot of, people joyously laughing. And if you ever go to a meditation group that's based on Vedanta or some offshoot of the Hindu tradition, there will often be a lot of jokes and laughter. And so the idea is that it's not, the idea isn't that we want to experience this Brahman so that we become all serene and we don't, it's joyous, right? The end result of the philosophy is joyous. It takes a long road to get there, depending on the tradition you're looking at. And there are disagreements among many of the Vedanta tradition, but that idea of playfulness, of joy, it can be seen in that word lila that goes back to early Sanskrit. So think of that when you think of Hinduism. If you don't think of anything else, think of God playing us like an instrument, but we are part of it. We are God. We're playing God playing himself, us playing ourselves. And when I say us, it's the capital U, the capital S for the capital self. Okay, folks, so I'm going to stop that there. In the next lecture, I'm going to go into some of the concepts that are probably more well known in the West, including the concept of karma, as well as the concept of dharma and a few others. Okay, I'll sign off there.